year was 1879, and the wind forgot to stop. It blew the topsoil from the Texas Panhandle clear into Indian Territory, carrying grit that stung the eyes and promises that tasted like alkali dust. This was Drywater Crossing, a town that was less a town and more a temporary argument between the prairie grass and the encroaching railroad. The law here was thin, stretched taut like old rawhide, and a man with enough ink and a willingness to lie could steal more land than a man with a gun. Hawk Noya knew this wind. He was 19 years old and had lived his whole life breathing this air, first as a boy of the Quahati Band, and now as something else, something in between. He sat his paint horse on the low rise overlooking the cluster of raw lumber buildings, his black hair tied back with a simple thong, his eyes missing nothing. He rode like he had been born in the saddle, a fluid extension of the animal beneath him. But when his feet touched the dusty street of Drywater Crossing, he was just another Indian, a Comanche, tolerated for his skill with horses, but watched, always watched. He ran a small horse camp out in the breaks, a place called Buffalo Grass, nothing more than a solid log cabin and a couple of corrals, but it was his. From there, he broke wild mustangs, turning their panic into partnership. He traded the finished horses, along with cured hides, for the things he could not make or hunt: salt, flour, coffee, and cartridges. He kept little for himself, the bulk of his earnings, converted into coin or goods, made the quiet journey north to the Red Knife Valley, a crease in the earth where his Aunt Shione was trying to hold together the remnants of their scattered band. She had 6 children under her care, orphans of the wars and the reservation sickness, and Hawk's dream was simple: to feed them, to build something that the wind and the white man's laws could not blow away. He urged his horse forward, down toward the livery. He was a man caught between two worlds, speaking his mother's tongue in the quiet of his camp and speaking passable, careful English in the town. He understood the lines, the invisible fences erected around him, and he navigated them with a quiet, watchful intensity. May Calloway knew all about invisible fences. At 22, she was trapped in one. She had come from Ireland, then from back east, following a dream of family that had burned to ashes. She had lost her PA and brothers somewhere on the trail, and the fire that took the freight office had also taken her last few dollars and her position as a bookkeeper. It left her stranded in Drywater Crossing, indebted to Silas Croft, the owner of the Gilded Nugget Inn. Her life was a cycle of drudgery. She woke before the sun to heat the water, scrubbed floors slick with mud and tobacco spit, washed mountains of greasy plates, and fell into her cot in the damp cellar long after the last drunk had been rolled into the street. She was known for 3 things. She was unnervingly steady. She was better than any man in town with a kitchen knife, and she knew her letters. She could read a contract and write a clearer hand than the magistrate himself. This last skill was a bitter irony, as it was a contract, signed in desperation for food and lodging after the fire. That now held her fast. She also had a 4th reputation, whispered by the men she served bad luck. This label had been applied 6 weeks prior, when a drunken cowhand had tried to corner her in the pantry. She had put the point of her skinning knife to the soft flesh under his chin and suggested he leave. The man, shamed and furious, had complained to Croft instead of defending her. Croft had added a charge to her debt for insubordination and driving off custom. She was quiet, yes, but she was not weak, and in Drywater Crossing, a woman's spirit was a liability. The town itself was held in the tightening grip of 2 men. Judge Ephraim Doolin was a man who never got his hands dirty, using his knowledge of obscure statutes and land grants to seize property, always for the good of progress. Progress, it seemed, always followed the survey lines of the new railroad. The second man was Bram Kersey, the muscle. Kersey was the foreman for a massive cattle corporation that was swallowing up the small ranches. Fueled by Doolin's paperwork and Kersey's brutal efficiency, he was a thick, bearded man with eyes that held a casual cruelty. This was the world in 1879, The great Comanche wars were over. The bands broken and forced onto reservations, but Hawk Noya was not reservation stock. He was Numunu, the people, and he would make his way. But he felt the pressure, the winner's law that said a treaty was only valid until a new map was drawn. On a Tuesday in October, the wind picked up its pace. It started as a whisper, then a howl, and by late afternoon, the world outside the Gilded Nugget's grimy windows was a churning wall of red dust. The sky turned a sickly yellow-brown. The street emptied. Doors were barred. Windows shuttered. Hawk Noya had finished his trading and was securing his supplies at the livery. When the storm hit its full fury, he paid the liveryman 2 bits to let his horse stay in the stable and decided to wait out the worst of it. The only place offering a hot cup of coffee that did not cost a full $1 was the Gilded Nugget. He slipped inside, keeping his hat low. He took a small table in the far corner, away from the bar, laying his coin on the table before May Calloway even approached. He was a shadow, accustomed to being ignored, which was precisely how he liked it. May, her face smudged with soot from the stove and her hair escaping its tight bun in damp strands, brought him the coffee without a word. Her hands, red and raw from lye soap, were steady. She moved with an economy of motion, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that Hawk recognized. It was the look of a horse ridden too hard and put away wet. The saloon was unnaturally quiet, the roar of the wind outside muffling all sound. Only a few men were present: Silas Croft, the weasel-faced owner, polishing glasses behind the bar, 2 freight haulers grounded by the storm, and, occupying the largest table, Bram Kersey. Kersey was drinking whiskey and looking bored, his thick fingers drumming a rhythm on the oak table. The oil lamps cast a sickly, wavering glow. Dust motes danced in the yellow light, fine grit settling on every surface. It was in this suffocating quiet that Silas Croft put down his rag. He walked over to May, who was wiping down an empty table. "You are short," he said, his voice flat but carrying in the still room. May did not look up. She kept wiping. "The accounts are in the book. Mr. Croft, I will have it balanced by morning." "I am not talking about my book," Croft hissed. "I am talking about your debt, your contract. You are $6 short on your weekly payment." May stopped wiping. She stood up straight, her back rigid. "I worked 7 days, sir, as agreed. The missing amount is what you docked for that plate I dropped." "A plate you dropped because you were clumsy," Croft snapped. "And the meal that was on it, and the whiskey spilled by the man who laughed at you. It all adds up." "May." Kersey looked over, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading under his mustache. He was enjoying this. "I cannot pay what I do not have," May said, her voice low and tight. "I will work it off, as I always do." "That is the problem," Croft said, stepping closer. He was a small man, but his proximity felt threatening. "Your work is not enough. You are a drag on this establishment. You are bad luck. People say so." "I am not bad luck," she said, her voice shaking just once before she mastered it. "I am just tired." "Well, your contract has a default clause," Croft said, gesturing to the papers he pulled from his vest pocket. He tapped them. "It says here, if payment is not rendered, your labor is subject to transfer to cover the remaining balance. $214. May's face went white. She knew that number. It was an impossible sum, inflated every week by interest and penalties. "Transfer," she whispered. "Transfer where?" Croft smiled, a greasy, triumphant expression. "Mr. Kersey here has expressed an interest. His corporation needs cooks and laundresses for their northern camps. They are willing to buy out your contract, every last cent." The room went utterly silent, save for the screaming wind outside. May looked at Bram Kersey. He was staring at her, not like a person, but like a horse he was about to break. He licked his lips. The northern camps. There were no women there, no law. It was not a job offer. It was a sentence. "No," May said, her voice barely audible. "You cannot. That is not legal." "Oh, it is perfectly legal, girl," Croft sneered. "Judge Doolin reviewed the paper himself. It is ironclad. You signed it." Tears of pure, cold rage and terror welled in May's eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of these men. She looked around the room, a desperate, frantic scan for help. The freight haulers stared into their beers. There was no one. Her gaze swept the room and finally landed in the far, dark corner. She saw him, the young Comanche man, sitting still as stone. He had been there so long she had almost forgotten him. He was watching. His face was impassive, carved from copper and shadow, but his eyes were bright. Hawk Noya did not move. He did not speak. He simply held her gaze. In that moment, with the wind howling like a hungry wolf and the yellow lamps flickering, their eyes locked. A man who lived on the edges and a woman who was falling off them. Everything stopped. The dust, the fear, the future. It all hung suspended in the air between them. A single, shared breath, held in the heart of the red storm. The red dust settled overnight, washed from the air by a hard, clean rain that followed the wind. By morning, the sky was a bruised, scrubbed-looking blue, and the puddles in the street of Drywater Crossing were already turning to thick, red mud. The business from the saloon had not been forgotten. It had only been postponed by the weather. Silas Croft was a man who hated delays in profit. Before the sun was 2 hands high, he had May Calloway marched from the inn cellar to the wide, muddy yard of the shipping warehouse. This was where contracts, for cattle or grain or men, were made official. A few curious townspeople gathered, mostly men from the saloon, along with a pair of bored-looking freight haulers in the ever-present shadow of Bram Kersey. Kersey was leaning against a support post, chewing on a piece of straw. He had already laid a stack of greenbacks on the barrelhead that served as a desk. Judge Ephraim Doolin stood near it, his black coat immaculate. His ledger open, he was here to witness and notarize, lending the entire sordid affair the unbreakable sheen of law. May stood alone in the center of the yard. She had washed her face, but the pallor beneath the grime was stark. She wore her only dress, a faded calico patched at the elbows. Her hands were clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were white. "Now then," Croft said, rubbing his hands together. "A straightforward matter of a defaulted contract. $214. Mr. Kersey has generously offered to meet the sum, in exchange for the remainder of Miss Calloway's labor." One of the haulers spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Heard she is a stubborn one. Kersey, put a knife on old Hanks." A few men chuckled. Kersey's smile did not reach his cold eyes. "I like 'em stubborn," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They learn better, or they learn harder. Makes no mind to me." He pushed himself off the post and walked to the barrel, tapping the stack of money. "Let us get this done. Judge, I have a long ride north." Doolin dipped his pen in the inkwell. "The sum is tendered. The contract is binding. Silas, your mark, Miss Calloway. Your presence is noted." "Wait!" The voice was not loud, but it cut through the morning air like a thrown blade. Every head turned. Hawk Noya stepped out from the alley between the warehouse and the blacksmith's. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace, his moccasins making no sound in the mud. He was clean. He had washed the dust of the storm from his face and hair. He led a horse. It was not his paint, but a young, strong-legged bay colt, barely 2 years old, broken to saddle but still holding the fire of the wild. It was a fine piece of horseflesh, and every man there knew it. He stopped a dozen feet from the barrel. His eyes were not on Kersey, or Doolin, or Croft. They were on May. "What is this, boy?" Croft snapped, his face darkening. "This is private business." "It is public law," Hawk said, his English clear and precise. He looped the colt's rein over a hitching post. The horse stood, trained and patient, a testament to its breaker. "You are selling a labor contract." "Buying it out," Kersey corrected, stepping forward to stand between Hawk and the barrel. He was a full head taller than the young Comanche and twice as wide. "And it is none of your affair, Indian." Hawk ignored him. He walked to the barrel, and from a pouch at his belt, he began to place his offer. It was not a stack of money. First, he laid down a long, heavy string of antique silver beads, the kind his grandfather had traded for. They clinked softly against the wood. Next, he unslung a saddle from his shoulder. It was a mescalero saddle, intricately tooled, with high cantle and horn, a working man's saddle built to last a lifetime. The men murmured. It was worth a small fortune. "This is my offer," Hawk said, his hand resting on the saddle. The beads, the saddle, and the bay colt. Croft's eyes went wide. He was a merchant. He knew value. This was easily double, maybe triple what Kersey had offered. "For the contract," Croft asked, his voice suddenly eager. "No," Hawk said. He looked at Doolin. "For a marriage." The yard went dead silent. The only sound was the bay colt blowing softly through its nose. Kersey actually laughed. A short, ugly bark. "A marriage? What in hell are you talking about?" "The laws of this county," Hawk said, his voice level, "state that a man and a woman, in the presence of a magistrate, can enter into a civil contract of marriage, with a simple declaration and a signature." He turned his gaze to May. "I am offering a bride-for-work contract under the law." Doolin's face went from bored to dangerously still. He understood immediately what was happening. Croft looked confused. Hawk continued, speaking to the judge as if no one else were present. "This contract, a marriage contract, supersedes a labor contract. It makes her my partner, my legal responsibility. Her debt becomes my debt, to be managed within the household." He was using their words, their logic. It voids any prior claim on her person. The shock was total. This was not some ignorant savage. This was a 19-year-old Comanche, speaking with the clarity of a Philadelphia lawyer. He had found the one legal loophole that could not be easily dismissed. That is preposterous," Croft sputtered. She is white." "The law, Mr. Croft," Doolin said, his voice clipped and cold, "is regrettably colorblind on this particular point. A civil union is a civil union." He looked at Hawk with a new, venomous interest. "However, the proposal requires the consent of both parties." He did not need to say the rest. No one imagined the woman would agree. To be bought by a cattleman was one thing. To willingly marry an Indian was something else entirely. It was social ruin. Bram Kersey's face was a mask of thunder. He saw his prize, the stubborn girl he intended to break, slipping from his grasp. "She will not do it," he growled. "She would rather go north." All eyes turned to May. This was her moment. She was trapped. She looked at Kersey, at his thick, powerful hands, his leering smile, and she knew what going north meant. It was a lifetime of abuse, a slow death in a cold, brutal camp. Then she looked at Hawk Noya. He was young, yes, and he was an Indian. He was an outcast, same as her. He had not looked at her like property. He had looked at her with a strange, quiet respect. He was offering her a name, a legal standing. He was offering her a way out that left her dignity intact, or at least what little of it she had left. He was not offering her passion, or love, or even kindness. He was offering her a simple, stark choice, one master, or one partner. She saw the value of what he had placed on the barrel, the silver, old and heavy with history, the saddle, a tool of his trade, his own hard work, and the colt, a piece of his future, his livelihood. He was not buying her cheap. He was offering everything he had. She took one, steadying breath. She raised her chin. Her voice, when it came, was clear and did not tremble. "I will," she said. The words hung in the air. Kersey lunged, his hand grabbing for her arm. "You little—" Hawk moved faster than a snake. He did not draw a weapon. He simply stepped between Kersey and May, his hand coming up to catch Kersey's wrist in a grip of iron. For a moment, the two men were locked, the massive, enraged cattleman and the lean, unmovable Comanche. Hawk's eyes were flat and hard as obsidian. "She has made her choice," Hawk said, his voice dangerously soft. "Get your hands off me, you redskin trash!" Kersey roared, trying to pull his arm free. "Enough," Judge Doolin's voice cracked like a whip. "There will be no brawling. Mr. Kersey, this is a place of law." He glared at Hawk. "Release him!" Hawk held the man's gaze for 1 second longer, then dropped his hand. Kersey stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, his face purple with rage. Doolin dipped his pen. His movements were jerky, angry. "A bad business, a very bad business." He shoved the ledger toward Hawk. "Your name." Hawk took the pen. In clear, careful letters, he signed Hawk Noya. Doolin then shoved the book toward May. "And yours." Her hand was shaking now, the reaction setting in. She took the pen, her fingers stained with lye and soot, and next to his name, she wrote May Calloway. Doolin slammed the ledger shut. The sound was like a gunshot. "Done! The contract is legal!" He looked at Croft, who was staring at the silver and the saddle with greedy eyes. "This," he said, pointing to Hawk's offering, "settles the debt of $214. The rest is a dowry, the property of the husband." Croft's face fell, but Doolin was already turning away. He looked at Hawk, his eyes cold and full of calculation. "A paper marriage will not save you from the land, boy. Remember that." Hawk simply nodded. He gathered the silver, slung the saddle back over his shoulder. The law was the law. The colt was now Croft's. He had paid a high price. Kersey stepped up to him, his face inches from Hawk's. "You stole what was mine," he hissed, his voice low enough for only Hawk to hear. "You stole from my boss's table. There are consequences for that. You just made an enemy you cannot afford." Hawk met his gaze. "The horse is at the post. The woman is with me." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned to May. She looked stunned, as if she were walking in a dream. "Come," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. He walked to the livery, May following a few steps behind him, a small bundle of her few possessions clutched in her hand. The crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and disgust. She did not look at them. She kept her eyes on the straight, proud back of the man who had just bought her. Hawk saddled his paint horse. He did not speak. He checked the cinches, adjusted the bridle. He mounted in one smooth motion. He looked down at her. He offered no hand, no comfort. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can," she said. "Good." He nudged the horse, walking it toward the edge of town, and she, with her head high, walked beside him. They left Drywater Crossing behind them, the mud of its main street, the judgmental eyes, the silent, watching buildings. They walked for nearly an hour, Hawk on his horse, May at his side. Before they cleared the last traces of the town, the prairie opened up, vast and green from the rain. The sun was warm now. Hawk finally stopped. He dismounted. "You will ride," he said. He cupped his hands. May hesitated, then put her booted foot in his grasp. He lifted her, and she settled into the saddle, sitting astride like a man. He handed her the reins, then he simply began to walk, taking the horse's bridle in his hand and leading them north, toward the breaks, toward the place called Buffalo Grass. The silence was immense. May looked at the man walking before her, his black hair, the set of his shoulders, the easy, ground-covering stride that seemed to cost him no effort. They arrived as the sun was beginning to dip in the west. The camp was nestled in a small, sheltered valley, protected from the wind by a stand of cottonwoods and a high bluff. It was not a teepee. It was a small, solid cabin, half sod, half log, with a stone chimney that puffed a thin line of smoke. A larger, well-kept corral stood nearby, along with a lean-to shed. Hawk led the horse to the cabin. He stopped, but he did not help her down. May slid from the saddle, her legs aching, her body stiff. He took the reins from her. He looked at her, his face as impassive as it had been in the saloon. "This is my home," he said. He pushed open the wooden door. May braced herself. She expected filth, animal skins, the smell of a bachelor's camp. She looked inside. The floor was hard-packed earth, but it was swept clean. A small, cast-iron stove stood in the corner, a pot of coffee still warm on its surface. A rough-hewn table and 2 stools were in the center of the room. Against one wall was a single, neatly made cot. Against the other, hanging from wooden pegs, was a row of bridles, ropes, and neatly coiled harness. Everything was in its place. Everything was clean. It was the cleanest, most orderly home she had seen in a very long time. Hawk busied himself with the horse, leaving May standing in the doorway of the small, clean cabin. She clutched her bundle, her knuckles white. The single room was dominated by the smells of coffee, wood smoke, and cured leather. It was a man's space, but it was not a rough one. He had built it with care. When he entered, he did not look at her immediately. He moved to the small stove, picked up the pot, and poured the remaining coffee into a tin mug. He held it out to her. May hesitated, then took it. The metal was hot, and she welcomed the warmth. Her hands were still shaking. He gestured to one of the 2 stools at the table. She sat. He remained standing, leaning against the wall near the door, his arms crossed. He watched her for a long moment. "You have questions," he stated. May looked down into the black coffee. "You paid a fortune. A saddle, a horse, all that silver." She looked up at him. "Why?" "I did not buy you," Hawk said, his voice flat and precise. "I bought a contract. Your contract, the one that made you property." "It feels the same," she whispered. "It is not." He pushed off from the wall and walked to the table. He took something from a shelf. "The paper I signed makes you my wife. The law sees you as my partner. It does not see you as my slave." He placed a new knife on the table between them. It was a simple kitchen knife, but the blade was sharp and the wooden handle was smooth. "This is yours." May looked at the knife, then at him. It was a symbol. He was not disarming her. He was arming her. "I needed a partner," he continued, his voice still measured. "I have a problem. 2 problems. First, I have land, and I have water. The water is called Dry Spring, but Judge Doolin and his railroad want it. I am Comanche. My word is not strong on paper. Your word is, I need someone who reads and writes the white man's law." He paced the small room, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. "My aunt, Cheyenne, lives in the Red Knife Valley. She cares for 6 children. Our family. They are orphans. They need things, flour, blankets, books. They will come here 1 day a week. They need a teacher. They need an adult who is not me." May's mind was reeling. A teacher. A legal negotiator. This was not what she had expected. "You bought a bride for work," she said, the words from the yard sounding absurd now. "I bought a bride to free her," he corrected, "so she could choose to work. As a partner, your debt to Croft is gone. You owe me nothing. You can leave right now. I will give you my horse, and you can ride to Fort Elliott. You will be free." She stared at him. "Ride to Fort Elliott with what? I have no money, no family. I am a bad luck woman who just married an Indian. What kind of freedom is that? It is the only kind I can offer, he said. And if I stay? She asked, her voice tight. What are the terms of this partnership? You run this house. You keep the accounts. You help me with the legal papers. You help the children when they come. In return, you have a home. You have protection, half of what this camp earns. After we feed the children, is yours. It was a better offer than any she had ever received in her life. It was fair, but there was one unspoken question. It hung in the small cabin, larger and more threatening than the stove. She stood up, pushing the stool back. She was small, but she did not look weak. One house, she said, her voice quiet but firm. One room, one bed. She pointed to the single cot. Hawk met her gaze. He did not flinch. Yes. I will not be that kind of partner. Mr. Noya, not now. Not until... She trailed off, unsure what she was even asking for. Until you trust me, he finished for her. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture. That is fair. He walked to the corner where a pile of buffalo robes and blankets were neatly folded. He picked them up. This is your house. You keep the cot. He walked to the door. I will sleep in the shed, with the horses. May watched him go, stunned into silence. He opened the door, and the cool night air spilled in. He paused on the threshold. My name is Hawk, he said. Not Mr. Noya. Then he stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. May was alone in the quiet cabin. She looked at the cot, at the new knife on the table, at the hot cup of coffee. She had been bought, sold, and married, all between sunrise and sunset. She did not know if she was a prisoner or, for the first time in her life, truly free. She was too tired to decide. She barred the door, sank onto the cot, and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The next morning, she woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. She rose, her body aching, and found a stack of fresh kindling and a bucket of water just outside the door. There was no sign of Hawk. She built a fire in the stove, made fresh coffee, and found a small sack of cornmeal. She made a simple mush, eating it as she looked around the cabin in the clear morning light. When Hawk returned, he was leading a horse. He simply nodded to her, took a tin plate of the mush she offered, and ate it standing by the door. Their new life began in that silence. He led her to the corral. You said you can ride. I can. She said, show me. He pointed to a quiet-looking mare. Saddle her. May had only ever ridden side saddle, on horses already prepared for her. She looked at the heavy leather saddle, the confusing web of straps and buckles. Hawk watched her, his face impassive. She struggled for 10 minutes, her face flushing with frustration, getting the cinch twisted and the blanket rumpled. Finally, he stepped in. He did not mock her. This, he said, his voice patient, his hands moving with quick, sure motions. Goes here, you pull tight, like this, so the horse can breathe. But the saddle does not slip. A loose saddle is a broken neck. For you, and for the horse. He taught her the knot, made her tie it 3 times. Then he taught her to track. He showed her a set of coyote prints, barely visible in the dust. He is walking, not hunting. His claws are not down. He pointed to the sky. He watches the buzzards. They show him where the dead things are. He taught her to read the grass, to see how the wind bent it, to notice a single broken twig that meant a man had passed. In the evenings, she returned the favor. He brought her a small, battered ledger. My accounts, he said. May opened it. It was mostly pictures. A drawing of a horse, followed by a drawing of a sack of flour, a hide, next to a drawing of a box of cartridges. But there were also scraps of paper, receipts from the general store in Drywater Crossing. She spread them on the table under the lantern light. Hawk, she said, her voice sharp. This man, Silas Croft, he was not just overcharging you. He was robbing you. He looked at the paper. I paid what he asked. He charged you 10% interest, compounded every week, for a bag of salt. This is criminal. She found her old bookkeeping skills returning, a cold, precise anger building in her. And this paper from Judge Doolin, it is not a title. He said it was, Hawk said, his voice tight. It is a notice of intent to file. It means nothing. It just means you told him you were here. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with a new, dangerous understanding. Hawk, this land, this water, dry spring, do you have a deed of claim? My people have always used this spring, he said. That is not what the law cares about. We need to file a formal claim, a homestead claim, or a riparian water rights claim. She saw the words, the legal terms, lining up in her head. We need to do it now, before Doolin or Kersey realize you have someone who can read their paperwork. He stared at her, a long, calculating look. Yes, he said, this is why you are here. He brought out a fresh piece of paper and a pen. I need to sign these. You show me. She looked at his signature from the marriage ledger, a memory from the day before. Hawk Noya. It was strong, but childishly formed. You write well, she said gently. But it is a signature. It should be fast, hard to copy. She held the pen. Like this. You flow. You do not draw. For an hour, she taught him to sign his name, over and over. He was a quick study. His hand, so strong and sure on a horse, learning a new, delicate kind of strength. A few days later, Hawk returned from a ride, his face set in hard lines. May was hanging laundry, a skill she despised but was good at. We have a visitor, he said, his voice low. Who? I do not know, but he is clumsy. He walks like a white man, heavy on his heels. He has been watching the cabin for 2 days. May's blood ran cold. Kersey? No, this one wears town boots. Expensive ones. He is hiding up in the rocks. Hawk's eyes scanned the ridge line. He is waiting. Or he is watching. The threat settled over the small cabin. That night, May barred the door, and she placed the new kitchen knife on the stool next to her cot. The true nature of the threat arrived a week later. Hawk had gone to town, a tense, silent journey to register their claim. He rode his best horse and carried his rifle. May, left alone, had spent the day cleaning, her nerves stretched thin. He returned just after dusk, his horse in a lather. He did not dismount, but slid from the saddle and burst into the cabin. Pack, he said, just what you can carry. What, Hawk? What is wrong? I was not followed. I am sure of it. But there is new trouble. He was checking his rifle, his movements fast and angry. There is a new man in town. More than one. A whole squad. Pinkertons. May froze. Pinkertons. They are asking questions. At the saloon. At the general store. They are looking for a witness. He finally looked at her. His eyes dark. They are looking for a woman. A witness to a fire. A woman named May Calloway. May felt the floor drop out from under her. The fire. The freight office. She had been there. She had been asleep in the back room, and she had woken up to the screams and the smoke. She had seen men, their faces hidden by bandanas, pouring oil and laughing. She had escaped out a back window. She had told the town marshal what she saw, but he had dismissed her, called her hysterical. The fire was ruled an accident. They said I was a witness, she said, her voice a dry rasp. They said you were a person of interest in the Thistle Creek Grays fire, Hawk said. The one that burned out the small ranchers. The one that happened right before Doolin's Cattle Corporation bought all that land for pennies on the dollar. May looked at him, her mind putting the pieces together with a terrifying click. The fire was not an accident. The men she saw, the land grab. "Kersey," she breathed. "It was Kersey. He was there." "And Doolin," Hawk finished. "And you are the only one who saw it. The only one who can prove it." He slammed his fist onto the table. A rare show of emotion. "They are not looking for a witness, May. They are looking to silence one. They are here to make sure you never talk." The room was silent. The man in the hills, the clumsy watcher. It all made sense. He was a scout, a Pinkerton. May sank onto the stool, her legs trembling. She was not just a broke laundress. She was a target, and she had just pulled this man, this boy, into the center of it with her. "I have to leave," she said. "I will go. Tonight. You were right. I will go to Fort Elliott." "No," Hawk said. "You do not understand. They will kill me, and they will kill you for helping me. They will kill you if you run. They are trackers. They are better than I am in a town." He sat across from her, forcing her to look at him. "This is our land. This is our home. We do not run." "What do we do?" she whispered. "We cannot fight Pinkertons." He did not answer for a long time. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out a small, carved piece of bone. It was a flute. He sat by the cold stove, the moon a sliver of light coming through the single window. He put the flute to his lips. He began to play. It was not a song May knew. It was a high, lonely sound, a sound like the wind over the prairie. But it held no fear. It was sad, and it was strong. When he finished, the silence in the cabin felt different. It felt fuller. "My grandmother taught me that," he said, his voice soft. "It is the song of the Fire family. She said our people are given two families, the one we are born to and the one we make, the one we choose to build a fire with." He looked at her. "She said the fire is everything. It is warmth. It is food. It is a light in the dark. It is home. The job of the Fire family is to keep it lit, to protect it, no matter who tries to put it out." He tucked the flute away. "They want to put out our fire. May, we will not let them. We will stand, and we will fight them, with the law, and with other things." May looked at the man across from her. He was 19 years old, a boy by any measure, but he spoke with the gravity of an old chief. He was offering to stand between her and the men who were hunting her. She looked at the barred door, at the clean floor, at the glowing embers in the stove. She was tired of running. She nodded, and for the first time since she had set foot in this dusty, God-forsaken land, May Calloway smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. The decision to stay settled over the small cabin, heavy as a wet blanket, but with the decision came a change. The silence between them, once empty, now felt charged with purpose. They were no longer just two strangers bound by a strange legal document. They were a garrison of two. Their days fell into a rhythm dictated by work and weather. Hawk rose before the sun, his time spent in the high corrals with the wild mustangs. He was working a new one, a magnificent gray stud with a wicked temper and eyes like chips of ice. He called him Ghost. May would watch from the cabin door, holding her hot coffee, as Hawk moved with the horse. It was not a fight. It was a dance, a long, patient conversation of pressure and release. He never used a whip, only his weight, his voice, and a long rope. He was a master, and May, who had only ever seen horses as beasts of burden, began to see them as he did as partners. While he worked the horses, May worked the camp. She had an organizational instinct that bordered on ferocious. She found scrap lumber behind the shed and, using Hawk's tools, built a set of sturdy shelves inside the cabin. She sorted his supplies, labeled sacks of flour and beans with charcoal on bits of wood, and took inventory. She mended his worn leather tack, her fingers, though sore, proving surprisingly deft with the awl and thread. She cooked, simple, hearty food. Pots of beans simmered all day with a piece of salt pork. And when Hawk brought back a deer, she stewed the venison with wild onions until the tiny cabin was thick with a smell that felt, startlingly, like home. Hawk, for his part, accepted her changes with a quiet nod. He had slept in the shed every night, never complaining, giving her the cabin as promised. He watched her work, the way she organized his chaotic ledger, the way she scrubbed the table until the wood gleamed. He was used to living alone, but he found he did not mind the intrusion. She was useful. She was steady. Then, a week after the Pinkerton news, the children came. May heard them before she saw them, a tumble of high, clear voices on the wind. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron, and saw Hawk riding in. He was not alone. Behind him trailed a small, weary-looking pony, and on its back, and walking beside it, were 3 children. A girl, who looked to be about 10, rode the pony. She had the same straight black hair and high cheekbones as Hawk, and she sat the horse with a natural, easy grace. A boy, perhaps 7, walked beside her, his hand on the pony's mane. He was wiry and quick, his eyes darting everywhere. Tailing them was a tiny girl, no older than 4, who was clutching the older girl's skirt and stumbling to keep up. Hawk dismounted and went to the smallest child, lifting her into his arms. The little girl wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shirt. "May," Hawk said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "This is Naomi, Taze, and this is Little Bird." Naomi, the oldest, slid from the pony. She stood straight and regarded May with a gaze that was far too old for her years. "How?" she said, a simple greeting. "Hello?" May said softly, her heart aching at the sight of them. They were thin, their clothes patched. "You are just in time. I have a pot of stew on." The children filed into the cabin, their eyes wide. Taze immediately went to the shelves, running his fingers over the smooth wood. Naomi's gaze landed on the small stack of books May had salvaged from her own meager possessions. "You read?" Naomi asked, pointing. "Yes," May said. "I do. Do you—" Naomi shook her head. "Aunt Shayoni knows the stories. She does not know the letters." That afternoon, while the children ate with a quiet, desperate hunger, May made a decision. She cleared a corner of the main shed. It was dry in there, smelling of hay and leather. She dragged in a small, 3-legged table and a bench. "What is this?" Hawk asked, watching her. "It is a school," May said. "If they are coming every week, they should learn. They need to know how to read your claim papers. They need to know how to read the contracts that men like Croft and Doolin write." Hawk looked at her, a long, unreadable expression on his face. "Yes," he said, "they do." The horse camp at Buffalo Grass became a school. Every week, Naomi, Taze, and Little Bird would arrive, and for 3 hours, May would teach them. She taught them their letters, drawing in the dirt with a stick, then graduating to a piece of slate and charcoal. Taze, she discovered, was brilliant with numbers. Naomi was a natural leader, absorbing everything so she could teach it to the others back at Red Knife. Little Bird just wanted to be held, and May, whose arms had been empty for so long, held her, rocking her and sounding out the letters at the same time. The work of the camp grew. A group of Tejano ranchers from the south, men who had been pushed onto marginal land by the big cattle outfits, heard about Hawk. They did not trust the white ranchers, but they needed horses. They came to Buffalo Grass, their hats in their hands, their dark eyes wary. Hawk was patient, showing his horses, but it was May who sealed the deal. She spoke a passable, broken Spanish she had learned in the kitchens back east, and she understood the language of contracts. She translated for Hawk, explaining the terms not in the predatory language of Duloan, but in simple, fair words. "He offers 3 teams of draft horses," she explained to the patriarch, "a man named Mr. Herrera. For this price, payment in coin or in feed, to be delivered by the 1st of next month. A fair trade, a good horse for a good price. Mr. Herrera watched her, then Hawk. He nodded. Bueno, he said. We make this trade. Hawk sold 3 teams that day. His reputation and May's began to spread. They were a team. He was the horseman. She was the voice. They were the people you went to when the law was not on your side. But fairness should be... The success did not go unnoticed. 2 days later, a man on a fine black horse delivered a letter. He was a county deputy. He handed the folded paper to May, tipped his hat, and rode away without a word. May opened it. It was official, embossed with the county seal. She read it, her blood turning to ice. "Hawk," she said, her voice shaking. He came in from the corral, wiping the sweat from his face. "It is from Judge Doolin," she said. "It is a legal notice. He is revoking all unregistered water rights along the Dry Spring Basin, pending a new survey. For the railroad, it says we have 10 days to vacate." "Vacate," he said, the word sounding foreign. "This is my land. We filed the claim." "He is ignoring the claim," May said, her mind racing. "He is using the railroad as an excuse to seize the water. He knows if he takes the spring, the land is useless. We cannot water the horses." She crumpled the paper in her fist. "He is stealing it. He is just stealing it." Hawk said nothing. He walked to the door and stared out at the small spring, the source of their entire life. "No," May said, a sudden, fierce energy in her. "No, I am not letting him." She grabbed her bonnet. "Where are you going?" "To town, to the county records office. If he is using the law, I am going to use it too. It is not safe, the Pinkertons." "They are looking for a witness to a fire," May said, her eyes hard. "Today, I am a bookkeeper. I will be in and out in an hour." She rode the quiet mare, taking the long way into town, her face hidden by the brim of her bonnet. She spent 45 minutes in the dusty, silent records office, ignored by the clerk who was busy reading a newspaper. She did not look for the Thistle Creek fire. She looked for maps, old survey maps. She found it, a survey from 1853, long before the county was even properly formed. It was a military map, detailing the wagon routes, and on it, marked clearly, was a spring, labeled Noya's Spring. "It was your grandfather's," she said that night, spreading the precious, fragile paper on their table. "It was registered by the Army as a landmark. It has a name, a legal name. He cannot just revoke a landmark. Hawk, he is counting on us not knowing this exists." She dipped the pen in ink. "I am writing him a letter, in my best hand, on your behalf, citing this map and citing our prior homestead claim. We are not vacating. We are respectfully informing him that his survey is in error." Hawk watched her write. The loops and curls of the script flowing from her pen, it was a weapon, just as sharp as his knife. The town was holding its monthly market night. It was a chance for the ranchers and townsfolk to trade, drink, and socialize. Hawk and May went, needing supplies. The atmosphere in town was tense. May could feel the eyes on her. The Pinkertons were here, somewhere. She saw men she did not recognize, men in city suits, watching the crowd. They were loading their wagon when a man came running from the saloon. "Fire!" he yelled. "Fire at the livery!" Hawk's blood ran cold. The livery! That was where he had left his wagon team. They ran. It was not the livery, it was the hay barn attached to it. The dry hay was going up like tinder, flames licking 20 feet into the night air. "My horses!" a man shouted, but Hawk was already moving. He ran into the burning barn. May screamed, but he was gone. He emerged a moment later, choking on the smoke. Leading his 2 terrified horses, he handed the reins to May. "Get them clear!" he yelled. He turned to go back in, to help the other animals, but a falling beam blocked the door. The heat was intense. Men were forming a bucket brigade from the town well. Hawk grabbed a bucket, May right beside him. They fought the fire for an hour, side by side with the rest of the town. Finally, the flames died down, leaving a smoldering, blackened skeleton. Hawk was leaning against a water trough, his chest heaving, his hands raw. May brought him a dipper of water. "You are burned," she said, touching his arm. A long, red welt was rising on his forearm, where an ember had landed. "It is nothing," he said, but he winced. "You are a fool," she said, her voice shaking. "You could have been killed for a horse." "They were trapped," he said simply, as if it were the only explanation needed. As she was tending to his arm, a man stepped out of the shadows. He was one of the men in the city suits, but his face was kind, and his eyes were tired. "That was a brave thing you did, Mr. Noya," the man said. "We do what we must," Hawk said, his voice wary. The man looked at May. His gaze was sharp. "Ma'am, a word. My name is Walt Hargreave." May looked at Hawk. He nodded, staying close. "That was not an accident," Hargreave said, his voice barely a whisper. "The stable hand is passed out drunk in the saloon. Bram Kersey was buying him drinks all night. Saw him slip out the back just before the yelling started." "Kersey," May breathed. "He was aiming for your horses," she said to Hawk. "He knew we were in town." "He was sending a message," Hargreaves said. He looked at May, his face grim. "Which is what I am doing." He stepped closer. "You need to leave. Miss Calloway, or Mrs. Noya. You need to leave tonight. The men I work for, they are not like me. They are not here to ask questions. They are here to close a case, the Thistle Creek case, and you are the last loose end." "You are one of them," May said. "A Pinkerton." "I am," he said, and he looked ashamed. "And I am telling you, the main group, the ones who do the cleaning up, they arrive on the morning train. You have until sunrise. After that, I cannot protect you. No one can." He tipped his hat. "Good luck, ma'am. I am sorry." He melted back into the shadows. They rode back to Buffalo Grass in a heavy, cold silence. The moon was high, casting pale light on the prairie. When they got to the cabin, Hawk built up the fire in the stove. He sat on his stool, staring at his burned arm. May sat across from him. "He is right," May said. "We have to run. I have to run. I have brought this on you. I have to go." Hawk looked at the fire. He was quiet for a long time. "My grandmother," he said, his voice rough with smoke and exhaustion, "told me about the Fire family. She said you do not run. You do not let the wind blow you out. You do not let the water drown you. You stand. You burn brighter." He looked up at her, his eyes catching the light from the stove. "This is our home. This is our fire. We do not run." "But, Hawk, they are Pinkertons and Kersey. He will burn us out, just like he did the hay barn." "Maybe." Hawk stood up. He walked to the small shelf where she kept the ledger. He touched it. "But you have the law, the maps, the letters. They are afraid of that. They are afraid of your words." May looked at the ledger. Hargreaves' warning, Doolin's notice, Kersey's fire. It was all connected. Doolin wanted the water. Kersey was his enforcer. And she was the one person who could tie them both to the Thistle Creek fire, a crime that could send them to prison. "He has the county clerk," she said, a sudden, cold realization hitting her. "When I was at the records office, the clerk, Mr. Sweeney, he was barely paying attention, but Doolin's name was on his desk calendar. 3 times this week. He is in on it. Doolin controls the law in this town." She stood up, her fear replaced by a cold, hard anger. "He is not just going to take this spring. He is going to erase it, and us with it." She opened the ledger. She turned to a fresh page. "I am not running. I am writing. I am writing down everything. Everything I remember about that fire. Every date. Every map, every overcharge in this book. We are not just going to keep our fire. We are going to use it to burn them down." Hawk watched her, the fierce, determined set of her jaw. He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Good," he said. "You write, I will watch the ridge." The new truce in the cabin did not mean peace, only a sharpening of the blades. May's ledger was now their fortress, and every night she added to it, her handwriting precise and cold, documenting the memory of the Thistle Creek fire, the fraud in Hawk's accounts, and the text of Doolin's illegal water revocation. Hawk, in turn, spent his nights outside, not always sleeping in the shed, but walking the perimeter of their small valley, his rifle in his hands, watching for the men he knew were coming. The spring, their dry spring, became the focus of their anxiety. It was the heart of the camp, the only reason this patch of land was viable. One morning, Hawk stood by its edge, staring into the water. May came to stand beside him, a bucket in her hand. "It is lower," he said. It was not a question. "But we had rain last week," May said, frowning. "It should be full." "This is not a dry spell," Hawk said, his eyes scanning the high, distant cliffs to the north, the ones that fed their aquifer. "This is a hand at the tap." He looked at her. "Your map, the army map. It shows this spring, but it also shows where the water comes from. An older place. My grandfather's spring. It is deep in the Palo Duro. Do you think Kersey or Doolin? I think they are not just trying to steal this water with paper. I think they are stealing it with shovels." He turned toward the corral. "You need to see it. The law needs to see it." "The Pinkertons," she said, the familiar dread rising. "It is not safe to be so far from the cabin." "It is not safe here," he countered. "We are mice in a box. It is time to see the trap." He saddled his paint horse. Then he turned to the high corral, where the gray stud, Ghost, watched him with intelligent, wary eyes. He saddled him, too. The horse had not yet been fully broken, but Hawk trusted him. "He is fast," Hawk said, handing her the reins to the paint. "You ride the mare. I will ride Ghost. We need his speed if there is trouble." They rode north, away from the flat prairie and into the vast, red rock labyrinth of the Palo Duro Canyon. It was a place of staggering, terrible beauty. The wind howled down the sheer cliffs, a constant, lonely sound. The ground was broken, treacherous. This was Hawk's land. He moved through it with a confidence that May envied. He pointed out pictographs on a hidden wall, the den of a coyote, the high circling path of an eagle. He was a different man out here, less a hunted outcast and more a king in his own wild kingdom. They rode for hours, the world shrinking to the clop of their horses' hooves and the sheer scale of the red rock walls. Wolves, Hawk had warned, still hunted here. May could feel their ghosts in the shadows, the sense of being watched by unseen, hungry eyes. The sky, which had been a clear, high blue, began to curdle. By mid-afternoon, it was the color of a fresh bruise. A cold wind ripped down the canyon, smelling of ozone and ice. "We must find shelter," Hawk yelled, his voice barely audible over the wind. He urged them toward a narrow game trail, a switchback path that climbed the canyon wall. It was the only way to the high-ground caves. The trail was barely a foot wide, the drop a dizzying 1,000 feet to the rocks below. Then the hail started. It did not begin gently. It was a sudden, violent assault of ice marbles, the size of a man's thumb. They struck the rock, the horses, and the riders with sharp, stinging cracks. The wind howled, turning the hail into a horizontal blast. The horses panicked. May's paint mare tried to rear, and May held on, her face pale, using every bit of skill Hawk had taught her. But Ghost, the gray stud, was still half wild. He screamed, a high, terrified sound, and his hooves slipped on the slick, icy rock. He went down on his haunches, his back legs scrambling, his iron shoes finding no purchase. He was sliding toward the precipice. "Hawk!" May screamed. Hawk had dismounted, trying to get to the stud's head. "Let him go!" Hawk shouted, his face a mask of desperation as he saw his best horse begin to slide. "He will pull you both!" But May was already moving. She had jumped from the paint, her own feet slipping on the ice. She grabbed Ghost's lead rope. The horse was wild-eyed, fighting, but she held on. "Easy!" she shouted, her voice thin in the storm. "Easy, boy. Walk up, walk up." She was not just holding him. She was leading him. She was planting her own feet, using her small weight to brace him, talking to him in the same low, steady cadence she had heard Hawk use. She was between the horse and the canyon wall, her own back scraping the rock. Hawk watched, frozen for a second. The horse, sensing the small, steady pressure, found a footing. He lunged, not away, but toward May, toward the safety of the wall. He scrambled to his feet. The hail was a torrent now, deafening. "This way!" Hawk bellowed. He grabbed May's arm and all but threw her toward a shallow overhang, a scoop in the rock wall. He shoved the horses in first, their bodies trembling. Then he pushed May flat against the back wall. There was no room for him. He stood in the mouth of the small cave, his back to the storm, and shielded her with his own body. May could hear the ice, like bullets, striking his back and shoulders. He was wearing only his leather vest and a cotton shirt. He did not flinch. He just stood, a solid, unmovable wall between her and the storm. "Hawk, you are being hit," she cried out. "It is just ice," he said, his voice tight. She was pressed against the stone, the smell of wet leather and his body filling her senses. She could feel the vibration of the impacts, the way his muscles clenched. He was taking a beating for her. He had trusted her with his horse, and now he was trusting the storm with his back. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the air clean and cold, the canyon floor white as if dusted with snow. Hawk finally turned, his face pale, his shirt soaked. He was rubbing his shoulders. "You are good with horses," he said. It was the highest praise he had ever given her. "You are a fool," she said, her voice thick. "You could have been crippled." "The Fire family," he said, a small, pained smile touching his lips, "protects the fire." They left the horses and walked the last mile. The ancient spring was in a high, hidden bowl of rock, but when they arrived, Hawk stopped dead. "No," he whispered. The spring, which should have been a deep, clear pool, was nothing but a circle of wet mud. "It is dry," May said, her heart sinking. "It is stolen." Hawk's voice was different. It was cold, flat, and full of a rage May had not heard before. He knelt, touching the mud. He began to track. His eyes scanning the ground, he moved with a speed that was terrifying. "Here," he said. He pointed. Boot prints, many of them, and the marks of shovels. They followed the tracks for a quarter of a mile, over a low rise, and then they saw it. It was a trench, 3 feet wide and just as deep, freshly dug. It was carefully camouflaged with brush and rocks. It intercepted the water before it reached the spring pool and funneled it down a different gully, one that led south, toward the vast, open plains owned by Doolin's Cattle Corporation. "Kersey," May breathed. "He did not just file a paper. He sent a work crew. He is bleeding your land dry at its source." "He is smart," Hawk said, his voice bitter. "He knows the law is slow, but a shovel is fast. He kills our spring. Our claim is worthless. He wins." "Not if we have proof." May was already pulling the ledger and a charcoal pencil from her saddlebag, which she had tied to her waist. "This is not just theft. This is sabotage. I am drawing this, I am mapping this ditch, every turn." While May knelt, her fingers flying as she sketched the trench, the landmarks, and the direction of the water, Hawk stood guard. He found a broken shovel handle, The brand Kersey Cattle Company, burned into the wood. He took it. Then he took his knife and began carving a series of symbols into his walking stick. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Marking the paces," he said. "From the big rock to the start of the ditch, paper can burn. My mind does not." They were so focused. They did not hear the men until it was too late. Two riflemen stepped out from the rocks, their guns leveled. They were not Pinkertons. They were rough, wearing Kersey's brand. "Well, looky here," one of them said, a man with a tobacco-stained beard. "The judge said you might come sniffin'. Did not figure on the squaw, though." "She is his wife," the other one said, laughing. "Drop the knife, Comanche." Hawk slowly, carefully, placed his knife on the ground. May's ledger was open on the rock. The man with the beard saw it. "What is that poetry?" He reached for it, but Hawk moved. It was not a lunge, it was an explosion. He grabbed the man's rifle barrel, yanking it down, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. The man went down, the rifle firing into the dirt. The second man raised his gun at Hawk, but May acted. She had been holding the lead rein for Ghost. She did not scream. She did not hesitate. She swung the heavy wet rope, the brass buckle at the end catching the man square across the face. He roared in pain, dropping his rifle, his hands flying to his ruined eye. Hawk was on his feet. The first man was grappling with him, pulling a knife. They were locked in a desperate, rolling fight in the loose rock of the trench. Hawk was faster. He disarmed the man, the knife spinning away. He had the man on his back, his own knife, which he had pulled from his boot, at the man's throat. The other man, blinded by blood, was stumbling away. The clearing was silent, save for the panting of the man beneath Hawk. "Kill him, Hawk," May whispered, her hand still clutching the rein. Hawk looked at the man, his face a mask of cold fury. The man was trembling, his eyes wide with terror. Hawk pressed the blade, just enough to draw a single drop of blood. Then he stood up, pulling the man with him. "You know me," Hawk said. "Yes, Noya, I know you. You work for Bram Kersey. He pays my wage." "Go back to him," Hawk said, his voice quiet. "Take your friend. You tell Kersey I was here. You tell him I saw the ditch. You tell him the water belongs to the Numunu, and you tell him I am coming for it." He shoved the man away. "Take your guns and go." The men scrambled, grabbing their rifles, and fled, supporting each other as they disappeared down the canyon. May stared at him. "You let them go. They will bring Kersey back." "They will," Hawk said, retrieving his knife. "That is the message. We know. Now they know we know. The fight is no longer in the shadows." The sun was already touching the canyon rim. The sky was turning a deep, bloody purple. It was too late and too dangerous to ride back. "We must find shelter," Hawk said, "a real shelter." He led her to a small, dry cave, one he knew from his boyhood. It was high on the cliff wall, hidden by a curtain of ancient, gnarled roots. Inside, it was dry and smelled of dust and old, cold fires. They built a small, careful fire, its smoke mingling with the mist rising from the canyon floor. They were quiet for a long time, the weight of the day pressing down on them. They had survived. They had the proof, but they were now, truly, at war. Hawk stared into the small flames. "My mother died in a place like this," he said, his voice so low May had to lean in to hear him. "We were running, after the soldiers burned our village on the reservation. It was winter. The snow was deep." He picked up a stick, tracing lines in the dirt. "We had no food, no fire. She got the sickness, the coughing. She died because she was cold, because we had no home to keep her warm." He looked at May, his eyes reflecting the tiny flames. "I will not be cold again. I will not run from a fire. I will stand." May felt a tightness in her chest. His pain was so clean, so old. I know about fires, she said, her own voice a whisper. The night I lost my job at the freight office. It was not an accident. I woke up. The smoke was so thick. She was trembling now, but she could not stop. The worst part was the sound. Before I saw the flames, I heard men. They were laughing. Hawk, they were pouring the oil, and they were laughing. I ran out the back, and I hid in a barrel. I was so cold, so scared. She looked at him. I am tired of hiding from men who laugh at fire. The silence in the cave was thick with their shared ghosts. He, a boy who had lost his mother to the cold. She, a woman who had lost her world to a fire. He had respected her boundaries, sleeping in the shed, never pressing. She was his wife on paper, his partner in work. But in this cave, they were something else. They were two survivors. She did not think. She simply reached out, across the small fire, and laid her hand on his, which was resting on his knee. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. He tensed at her touch. His gaze snapped from the fire to her face. He saw no pity there, only a shared understanding. He looked down at her small hand, scarred from lie, covering his own. Slowly, carefully, he turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. It was not a lover's touch. It was not a gesture of passion. It was an oath, a bond forged in hail and battle and the memory of cold. They held hands across the fire, and in the deep, dark heart of the Palo Duro, the Fire family was truly born. They rode back the next morning in a tense, watchful silence, taking a different route. As they neared the edge of their own property, Hawk reined in his horse. Wait, he said. He dismounted and walked to a stand of mesquite. He pulled something out of the brush. It was a new, raw pine survey stake, and another, and another. Kersey's men, May said, her stomach twisting. They have been here. They are remarking the lines, Hawk said, his voice grim. They are drawing Doolin's new map. He pulled one of the stakes from the soft earth, but as he did, something else, something small and metal, fell from the grass. Hawk knelt and picked it up. He wiped the mud from it on his pants. It was a small, heavy brass disc with a wooden handle. May slid from the paint, her eyes wide. What is it? Hawk handed it to her. She turned it over in her palm. It was a seal, carved into its face. In reverse were the words, County of Drywater, State of Texas. It is the county seal, she whispered, a terrible, triumphant cold spreading through her. The one Judge Doolin uses to make his papers official. One of his men, one of Kersey's clumsy men, must have dropped it. She looked from the seal to the fake survey stake, to the ledger tied to her saddle. Hawk, she said, her voice shaking with the force of her realization. We have it. This is the proof. The trench proves the theft. But this stamp, this connects Doolin himself to the fraud. He is not just ignoring the law. He is faking it. They rode back with the devil in their saddlebags. The small, heavy brass seal sat in May's pocket, a cold weight against her leg, a counterpoint to the map of the stolen water and the ledger full of Doolin's crimes. They were not just survivors anymore. They were armed. They had the truth, and they had the proof. But the land was alive with enemies. As they cleared the last of the canyon breaks and looked out over the flat expanse that led to their valley, Hawk reined in his horse. He pointed, not with his finger, but with his chin, a subtle, sharp gesture. May looked. A thin, lazy column of dust rose to the north, the direction of the railroad line. It was not a wagon. It was too many riders, moving at a steady, ominous pace. The Pinkertons, she whispered. Hargreaves' main group. Yes, Hawk said, his voice tight. His eyes scanned the horizon, moving east. He stiffened. What? May asked, her heart seizing. What else? Dust, he said, his voice raw. From the south, from Red Knife. He looked at her, his face a mask of sudden, terrible understanding. The children. It is their day. The trap snapped shut. The Pinkertons, Kersey's enforcers, were coming from the north. The children, innocent and unsuspecting, were coming from the south. And they, Hawk and May, were in the middle. "We must stop them!" May cried, turning her mare. "No," Hawk's voice was a whip. "They are too close. We cannot outrun the Pinkertons, and we cannot reach the children first. They will all meet here." He was already pulling the saddle from the paint. "We do not run. We make our stand." He ran to the high corral, his moccasins flying. He vaulted the fence. Ghost, the gray stud, watched him, his ears pricked. Hawk approached him, not with a rope, but with his hands open. He spoke in Comanche, a low, smooth sound. The horse, the untamable one, lowered his head. In less than a minute, Hawk was back, leading the magnificent horse. But he did not go to May. He rode toward the southern trail, scanning, his eyes desperate. He saw her, Naomi, riding the small, shaggy pony, with Taze and Little Bird. They were still a mile out. Hawk was a blur of motion. He rode Ghost at a full gallop, an intercept course. May watched, her heart in her throat. As he met them, she could not hear the words, but she could see the frantic gestures. She saw Hawk lift Naomi from the pony and place her on the back of the gray stud. He was pointing, stabbing his finger toward the east, toward the broken lands, then back toward Red Knife. Naomi's small, straight back was rigid. She nodded once. She grabbed Ghost's mane. And the horse, the fastest animal in the county, launched. He flew over the prairie, not toward the cabin, but away, away, to warn, to circle, to be safe. Hawk grabbed Taze and Little Bird, one in each arm, and threw them onto his paint. He vaulted up behind them and rode back to the cabin, the pony trailing, confused. "She will warn them," May asked as he slid to the ground. "She will ride to Cheyenne," Hawk said, his voice grim as he hustled the terrified children inside. "She is the fastest rider. Ghost will not fail her." He looked at May. "But we are alone, and we have 2 small mouths to protect. Bar the door." As if his words had summoned it, the sky, which had been clear, turned. A cold, sudden wind came out of the north, carrying the first stinging drops of rain. The riders were coming, and so was the storm. Inside the cabin, the world shrank to the smell of wet wool and fear. Taze, who was 7, tried to be brave, but his eyes were huge, fixed on the rifle Hawk was loading. Little Bird, the smallest, began to cry, a thin, whimpering sound that cut through the tension. May acted. Her mind, so used to ledgers and fear, switched to a different kind of accounting. She went to the corner, the school corner, and pulled out the slate. "Taze," she said, her voice remarkably calm. "You did not finish your numbers last week. Sit, we have work." Taze looked at Hawk, then at May. The calm authority in her voice was more powerful than the fear. He sat. May took Little Bird in her lap. "Hush, little one. It is just the rain. It is a good, loud rain." She held the child close, her body a shield. She began to draw on the slate, a simple drawing of a house. "See, this is a home. This is our home. Safe." The rain turned to a torrent, hammering on the sod roof. The wind howled, a counterpoint to the child's soft whimpers, which were quieting. Hawk moved about the cabin. He checked the bar on the door. He wedged a piece of wood into the frame of the one small window. He checked the chinking in the logs, his eyes scanning for any weakness. His movements were economical, precise. He was a man preparing for a siege. He looked at May. She sat on the floor, the 2 children huddled against her, her back to the wall, the slate in her hand. The stove was radiating a deep, steady warmth. In the midst of the rising storm, in the center of a ring of approaching enemies, She had created a tiny, stubborn circle of peace. The light in the cabin faded to a deep, watery gray. Night fell. The children, worn out by the fear and the long ride, finally slept. May and Taze had finished their numbers, and May had told them a story, an old Irish tale about a clever bird who tricked a fox. Taze and Little Bird were bundled in every blanket May and Hawk owned, in the driest, warmest corner of the cabin, their chests rising and falling in the rhythm of innocent sleep. The storm raged. The cabin was a single point of warmth in the black, wet chaos. Hawk sat on his stool, cleaning his rifle, the parts laid out on a piece of clean cloth. May sat on the other stool, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of hot coffee. The only sound was the roar of the rain and the click of oiled metal. May took a small, braided thing from her apron pocket. It was made of red and black yarn, woven clumsily. "They made this for you," she said, her voice quiet, barely carrying over the storm. "Taze and Naomi, last week, they wanted to thank you for the lessons." She stood up and walked to him. He stopped his work. He looked at the simple, childish braid. May took his left hand, the one with the long, healing burn from the fire at the livery. Gently, she tied the braid around his wrist. The bright, soft yarn was a stark contrast to his calloused skin and the angry red of the scar. He stared at it. He did not speak. He looked up at her. His eyes, in the lamplight, were deep and full of a feeling she could not name. "My grandmother," he said, his voice rough, "said the man was the hunter. The man was the warrior. He brought the meat, but he was nothing." He touched the yarn braid with his other hand. "She said the woman was the fire. She was the one who kept the heart of the home, the one who made the family, the keeper of the fire." He stood up, and he was very close. He reached out, not to hold her, but to gently touch her face. His thumb, rough as a corn cob, brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. "You are the keeper of the fire, May," he whispered. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for just a second. All her life she had been running, been cold, been alone. Now, this man, this boy, in this tiny, clean room, had called her by her true name. He did not kiss her. It was something more. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head. He held her, just held her. May pressed her face into the rough cotton of his shirt. It smelled of wood smoke, horses, and the faint, clean scent of the rain. She put her arms around his waist, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world. And he was. They stood there, locked together in the center of the cabin. For a long time. It was not a desperate, frantic clutch. It was a slow, deep confirmation. It was the sealing of a vow made in a cave, the acknowledgement of a bond that had been built one day, one lesson, one shared meal at a time. He was not her owner. She was not his employee. They were a single unit, breathing in time with the storm. He had bought a bride for work. That was the legal fact. But in that moment, holding her, he knew he had been given the family he had missed, the family he had been fighting to build. "My home," he murmured into her hair. "You are my home." She nodded against his chest, unable to speak. Finally, they drew apart, but only inches. They were a team. The fear was still there, but it was no longer a cold, lonely thing. It was a shared burden. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady now, "we show them the ledger, the map from the canyon, and the seal." "Tomorrow," he agreed, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "We show them the law. We show them what we know." "And tonight?" "Tonight," he said, his eyes moving to the sleeping children. "We keep the fire. We keep them safe." Outside, as if on cue, the wind died. The rain, which had been a roar, softened to a steady, rhythmic drip. The storm had broken. and in the sudden, deep quiet, they heard it. A sound, not the wind, not the rain. A soft knock. Tap, 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 tap. Hawk had his rifle at his shoulder, pointed at the door, in a single, fluid motion. May grabbed the kitchen knife, her hand steady. "Who is it?" Hawk called, his voice a low growl. A whisper came from outside, barely audible. "Noya, it is Hargreave. For God's sake, let me in." Hawk looked at May. She nodded. He lifted the heavy bar. The door swung open a crack. Walt Hargreave, the Pinkerton, spilled inside. He was soaked to the skin, his city hat ruined, his face pale and drawn. He was alone. "You are a fool to be here," Hawk said, barring the door behind him. "I am the only friend you have," Hargreave panted, his eyes wide, taking in the scene, the warm room, the sleeping children, the armed man and woman. "My God," he whispered. "What is it?" May asked. "Doolin is not waiting for a fight," Hargreave said, pulling a wet piece of paper from his coat. "He is not coming as a thief. He is coming as the law. He just signed this. An hour ago, I saw him." He unfolded the paper. It was a warrant. "It is an arrest warrant. For May Noya, my men, the main squad. They are here to serve it. They are not here to talk about water rights." "A warrant for what?" May said, her blood turning to ice. "Perjury," Hargreave said, his voice bitter. "Regarding the Thistle Creek fire, he is claiming you lied in your initial report. He is claiming you are a false witness." "But I am not. I told the truth." "It does not matter," Hargreave hissed. "He has a signed warrant, and he has 20 men out there, my Pinkertons, and a dozen of Kersey's hired guns, all freshly deputized. They are surrounding this valley right now." He pointed to the window. "They are just waiting for the dark to clear. They do not like working in the mud. At first light, they will come. They will call for you to surrender. If you do, they take you. If you do not, the warrant gives them the right to take you by force." Hargreave looked at the children, his face a mask of pity. "You have until sunrise. Noya, that is all. I have to go." He was out the door before Hawk could say a word, disappearing back into the wet darkness. Hawk barred the door. The finality of it settled on the room, colder than the rain. They were trapped. He looked at May. She was not crying. She was not trembling. Her face was white, but her eyes were burning. She walked to the table. She picked up her ledger. She picked up the map of the stolen trench. And she picked up the small, heavy brass county seal. "He wants a false witness," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, pure rage. "He is about to meet a real one." Hawk looked at his wife. He looked at the sleeping children. He looked at the barred door. He picked up his rifle. "They have the law," he said. "We have the truth," she replied. They did not speak again. They began to prepare for the dawn. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, a pale, watery gray that promised light but not warmth. Inside the cabin, no one had slept. The rain had stopped, leaving a world of dripping eaves and thick, red mud. Hawk Noya pressed his eye to the crack in the cabin door. "They are here," he whispered. May, who had been rocking Little Bird by the cold stove, froze. Taze was already awake, his 7-year-old face pale and pinched. "He is moving them," Hawk said, his voice flat. A tactical report. "Kersey, he is not waiting at the mouth of the valley. He is splitting his men. He has 8 riders. 4 are coming up the main path. The other 4 are circling west." He went silent, watching. "And they have set something by the main gate. A line. A trap." He turned, and the small, warm cabin became a war room. He looked at May. "Doolin and his warrant will come from the town. Kersey is here to make sure we do not reach it." "They have us pinned," May said, her voice shaking. "We are trapped." "No," Hawk said. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. He grabbed his lariat. We are split. You are the proof. I am the target. We give them both, but not how they want. He grabbed May by the shoulders, his grip hard. You must go to the town. You must show the people the ledger, the seal. How they are at the gate. Not the gate. The creek trail. The one you ran with the children. He pointed out the back window, toward a deep gully choked with brush. It is 3 miles. It is all mud. It will be hard. But it will bring you out by the old wooden bridge, south of the main street. They will not be watching there. They think you are here, with me. He knelt in front of Taze. You are the man of the family now. Taze, you hold your sister's hand. You do what May says. You do not make a sound. You are Comanche. Yes. The boy, terrified, puffed out his chest and nodded. A single, sharp jerk. And you? May asked, her throat tight, already pulling Little Bird into a sling on her back, gathering the precious, waterproofed ledger. Hawk smiled, a thin, feral expression that was not a smile at all. I am the diversion. Kersey is not here for the law. He is here for me. I embarrassed him. I will draw him west. I will pull his men away from you. I will give you time. He looked at her, his eyes holding hers. There was no time for the words, for the feelings of the night before. Go, he said. Ring the church bell if you must, but show them the truth. Keep the fire, May. He gave her a small, sharp knife. For the rope, if you need it, or for the men, do not be taken. She nodded. She grabbed Taze's hand. We go. She slipped out the back door, a gray shadow disappearing into the gray morning, swallowed by the mud and the mist of the creek bed. Hawk waited. He counted to 100, his breathing slow. He swung open the cabin door. He walked to his paint horse, tied to the corral, and calmly saddled him. He was in plain sight. A shout rang out from the ridge. There he is! He is at the cabin! Hawk mounted his horse. He did not look toward the creek. He turned his horse west, away from town, and kicked him into a run. The plan worked. A rifle shot cracked, the bullet whining over his head. He is running, a man bellowed. Bram Kersey, who had been waiting at the main path, roared in frustration. He is getting away, all of you. With me, he is running west. Sir, one of the Pinkertons yelled. The warrant is for the woman. Our orders are the cabin. I will have his scalp first, Kersey snarled, his pride overriding his orders. He is mine. He spurred his horse, and his 5 best riders thundered after him. The prairie chase had begun. The 3 Pinkertons left behind, angry and confused, advanced on the cabin. Mrs. Noya, by the authority of the county court, come out! They kicked open the door. The cabin was empty. The stove was cold. Damn it, the leader said. She is gone. She must have bolted. Search the grounds. But May was already a mile away, her lungs burning, her boots sinking deep into the red muck of the creek bed. Little Bird was a heavy, silent weight on her back. Taze, his small hand in a death grip on hers, was crying silently, but he did not slow down. Hawk rode hard. He knew this land better than any of them. He was not just running, he was leading. He pushed the paint, letting Kersey's heavier horses tire themselves in the mud. He was heading for the low, broken ridges where the wild horses grazed. Kersey was a good tracker, and he was fueled by a deep, murderous rage. He saw Hawk's paint, a splash of white and brown against the green-gray prairie. Faster! He yelled. He is heading for the flats. Hawk crested a rise, and there they were, a herd of perhaps 30 wild mustangs, grazing peacefully, their coats still wet from the night's rain. Hawk did not slow. He unslung his rifle. Kersey, seeing this, thought Hawk was making a stand. He and his men reined in, spreading out, pulling their own weapons. Hawk did not fire at them. He fired into the air, once, twice. The sound, sharp and flat in the open, hit the herd like a physical blow. 30 heads snapped up. Hawk rode his paint straight at them, whooping, firing his rifle at the ground near their heels. The herd panicked, with a sound like thunder. The wild horses exploded, turning as one, and ran south, directly into the path of Kersey's pursuit. "Hold!" Kersey screamed, his horse rearing, its eyes white. It was too late. The men could not shoot. For fear of hitting the horses, they were forced to pull back, to stop, as a wall of terrified horseflesh, 1,000 pounds of muscle and hoof, thundered past them. The ground, damp on top, was dry beneath. The stampede kicked up a colossal, choking cloud of red dust. It rose hundreds of feet, a sudden, blinding curtain that blotted out the sun. Kersey and his men were enveloped, coughing, their horses screaming. "Where is he? Where did he go?" Kersey roared, his voice muffled by the dust. When the dust finally settled, minutes later, the prairie was empty. The mustangs were gone, and Hawk Noya had vanished. May was on her last legs. She had made it. The creek bed had emptied out near the old wooden bridge. Just as Hawk had said, she could see the town, the spire of the church. She adjusted Little Bird, who was whimpering, and pulled Taze up onto the path. "We are safe. Taze, we just have to cross the bridge." But as she stepped from the trees, she stopped. 3 men stood at the mouth of the bridge. They were not Kersey's rough riders. They wore clean, dark city suits, Pinkertons. They had been waiting. "Mrs. Noya," the leader said, his voice polite. He held no gun. He simply stood in her way. "We have been expecting you. The judge is waiting. Please come with us." "No," May panted, her heart a cold stone. "No, I am going to the town." "The town is where we are going," the man said, his smile thin. "The judge is in his office. You will give us the book, and you will come." He took a step toward her. "Leave her be, Stockton." The voice came from behind the men. Walt Hargreave stepped out from the side of the bridge. His face was pale, his jaw set. "Hargreave," Stockton said, his polite mask dropping. "Stand down. This is official business. We are serving a warrant." "You are serving a death sentence," Hargreave said. He looked at May, at the terrified children. "This is not justice. It is a paid killing. You are done in this line of work, Hargreave." Stockton sneered. "Now get out of the way." He lunged, his hand reaching for the ledger. The gunshot was deafening. It was not at May. It was not at Stockton. Hargreave had drawn his pistol and fired a single shot into the wooden planks of the bridge, the bullet striking a half-inch from Stockton's boot. Stockton froze, jumping back. The other 2 Pinkertons drew their weapons, but they pointed them at Hargreave. "Have you lost your mind?" Stockton yelled, his own gun now in his hand. "You fired on a fellow agent." "I fired on a kidnapper," Hargreave said, his voice cold and steady. He grabbed May's arm, pulling her roughly, shoving her behind him. "Get on the bridge," he hissed at her. "Get the children to the church." He turned, his pistol now aimed directly at the 3 men. He was a one-man wall, standing between her and his colleagues. "You will not pass," he said. "You will not harm this woman. You will not harm these children. Not today." "This is mutiny," one of the agents shouted. "This is the law," Hargreave countered, "and you are on the wrong side of it." May did not wait. She ran. She grabbed Taze's hand and fled across the wooden bridge, the sound of the men shouting behind her. She did not look back. Hawk had not vanished. He was hurt. His paint had stumbled in the chaos, and he had been forced to slow. He was now at the edge of the great alkali flats, a wide, gray-white scar on the land. He knew the ground looked dry, but after the rain, it was a trap. Kersey, his face a mask of red dust and black fury, had tracked him. His men, fanned out, had Hawk cornered against the seemingly impassable mud pit. "Nowhere to run, Indian," Kersey shouted, dismounting. He pulled his rifle. "This ends. Right here." Hawk was breathing hard. His horse was spent. He slid from the saddle, his back to the gray flat. He held up his hand, as if in surrender. Kersey laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "Begging I did not think you had it in you." He wanted this moment. He walked toward Hawk, his rifle leveled, his men watching. "I told you. You embarrassed me. You stole what was mine. Now you pay." As Kersey advanced, Hawk's hand moved, not to a gun, but to the lariat at his side. He began to build a loop. "You going to rope me, boy?" Kersey mocked. "From 10 feet. Hawk did not throw the loop at Kersey. He threw it low, fast, and past him. The loop snapped shut not on Kersey, but on the front legs of Kersey's own horse. Hawk yanked hard. The horse caught, screamed, and went down. Kersey, his instincts betrayed, turned. "My horse!" he yelled, his attention broken for a single, fatal second. In that second, Hawk was on him. He did not run, he tackled him. But he did not tackle him onto the hard prairie. He tackled him backward, into the alkali pit. The dry gray crust shattered like ice. Both men plunged into a morass of thick, stinking, gray-black mud. It was up to their waists, instantly. Kersey roared, blinded, as the foul mud filled his eyes and mouth. He raised his rifle, but it was caked, useless. This was not a gunfight. It was a primeval struggle. Kersey was a bear of a man, thick and strong, but the mud was a great equalizer. It sucked at their legs, their arms. Hawk was lighter, faster. He was a man of the earth, and this was his element. He shoved Kersey's head under the surface. The man thrashed, bubbles rising. Hawk pulled him up, only to slam him down again. Kersey came up sputtering, choking, all the fight gone, replaced by pure, animal terror. Hawk drew his knife. He had Kersey by the hair, the man's head pulled back, his throat exposed. He was covered in the gray muck, a mud demon, his eyes burning. "Do it!" Kersey gasped, his voice a wet rattle. "Do it, savage!" Hawk held the blade there for a long, silent beat. He saw the man's terror. He saw the end of the line. "No," Hawk said, his voice a rasp. "I am not you." He let go of Kersey's hair. He did not kill him. He reached down and pulled the pistol from Kersey's belt. He pulled the man's ammunition loops free. He left him there, disarmed, half-drowned, and beaten. "The town can have you," Hawk said. He began the long, hard walk out of the mud, back to solid ground. May hit the main street of Drywater Crossing and did not stop. She ran, screaming, "Fire, fire, help!" It was the only word she knew that would bring people running. And they did. Mr. Peterson, the blacksmith, dropped his hammer. Mrs. Sanchez, from the Mercantile, ran out onto the boardwalk. Judge Ephraim Doolin, standing on the steps of the county office, his morning coffee in hand, saw her. This was not the plan. This was a disaster. Mrs. Noya," he bellowed, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. He strode toward her, pulling the warrant from his pocket. "Stop right there. You are under arrest." May stopped. She was in the middle of the street. Taze and Little Bird were clinging to her. Her dress was torn, caked in mud. She was shaking. The townspeople were gathering, forming a half-circle. "You are under arrest for perjury," Doolin shouted, playing to the crowd. "This woman is a liar. She has been spreading false tales about this county." He pointed to the ledger in her hand. "Give me that book, it is evidence." He was advancing, his hand out, ready to snatch the ledger and destroy it. "No," May's voice, raw and desperate, cracked. "This is not evidence, this is the truth." Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely open the book. But she did. "He wants to arrest me because I saw him," she cried out. "I saw Bram Kersey set the Thistle Creek fire. He did it so Doolin could steal the land. A gasp went through the crowd. "Lies," Doolin roared. "Is this a lie?" May shouted, pulling the map she had drawn from the ledger. "He is stealing our water. He dug a ditch to divert Noya's spring. A landmark on the army maps. He is killing our farms to feed his railroad." She is hysterical. "Am I?" May's hand fumbled in her pocket. She pulled out the heavy, brass object. She held it high, the mud-caked seal glinting in the morning sun. Then how did his men drop the official county seal on our land, while they were planting fake survey stakes? He is not the law. He is a fraud. The town went dead silent. The blacksmith, Peterson, looked at the seal. He looked at Doolin. Into this silence stepped Walt Hargreave. He walked calmly through the crowd, his face grim. He was holding a different book, a small, black one. He stopped in front of Doolin. The judge was pale, his fury mixed with a new, cold fear. "She is telling the truth." "Judge," Hargreave said, his voice carrying, "I thought I was hired to find a witness. I was hired to hunt one." He held up the black book. "This is Bram Kersey's private payment ledger, the one he keeps for you. It lists the bonuses for the Thistle Creek job. It lists the wages for the men who dug the ditch. It lists the payment my agency received from you, to silence a woman who knew too much." Hargreave held the book out. The entire town held its breath. Doolin, with his warrant. May, with her ledger. Hargreave, with his proof. A man shouted from the edge of town, "Riders coming fast!" It was not a rider, it was Hawk, covered in gray mud, his rifle in his hand, walking with a deadly, determined stride, and 50 yards behind him, stumbling, unarmed, and utterly defeated, was Bram Kersey, being marched toward the justice he had so long avoided. The trap was sprung. All the pieces were on the board, and no one knew who would be the first to start shooting. The main street of Drywater Crossing was a frozen tableau of mud and men. May stood in the center, her ledger held like a shield, the brass seal a cold weight in her hand. Hargreave held his own book out, a black accusation against Judge Doolin. Hawk, a figure of gray mud, stood at the edge of the street, his rifle in his hand. Behind him, Bram Kersey, defeated and unarmed, stumbled. The silence was absolute. Then it broke. The first shot did not come from the street. It came from the roof of the Mercantile. One of Kersey's men, a rifleman left as a sniper, had his orders. He did not aim for the mud-caked Comanche. He aimed for the evidence. He aimed for Walt Hargreave. The rifle cracked. Hargreave's body jerked. A violent, unnatural twist. The black ledger flew from his grasp as he collapsed, clutching a dark, spreading stain on his shoulder. May screamed. The sniper on the roof cursed, levering another round. He had missed his kill. He swung the rifle, moving his aim to the next logical target. The woman, the one with the other book. He never fired. A second shot, louder, deeper, boomed from the roof of the cantina across the street. The sniper stood up, a look of profound surprise on his face. He toppled forward, falling in a loose, boneless heap into the muddy street below. Petra, the Tejana widow who ran the cantina, stood up from behind her chimney, an old, heavy buffalo rifle smoking in her hands. She looked at May, nodded once, and began to reload. The street erupted into chaos. "Get them!" Doolin shrieked, his voice a panicked falsetto. "Get them all!" The Pinkertons who had been with Stockton, their loyalty to their paycheck overriding their duty, drew their weapons. The remains of Kersey's men scattered, took cover. Hawk was already moving. He was not a townsman. He was a warrior, and he saw the lines of attack. He saw May, frozen in the open, Taze and Little Bird clinging to her. He ran, not to her, but through her. He hit her with his full body, a tackle that was not an attack, but a rescue. "No," he roared, shoving her, pushing her not toward the open street, but toward the one solid piece of cover, the heavy stone wall of Peterson's blacksmith shop. May stumbled, falling against the hot forge. Hawk was with her a second later, his back to the stone. He pulled Kersey's pistol from his belt and shoved it into her hand. "You know how to load. When it is empty, you load it." He did not wait for an answer. He dropped to one knee, his rifle at his shoulder. A Pinkerton rounded the corner. Hawk fired. The man fell. May, her hands shaking, her mind numb, looked at the heavy pistol. She looked at Taze and Littlebird, who were huddled in the coal bin, where Peterson, the blacksmith, had thrown them. She looked at Hawk, his back to hers, his rifle tracking the street. "We need to reload faster," he said, his voice calm. May, the bookkeeper, the laundress, the teacher, raised the pistol. She fired at the flash of a rifle from the saloon window. She missed, but the man ducked. They were back to back, a man of mud and a woman of ink, holding the center of the town. Judge Ephraim Doolin was a man of paper, and he saw his paper world burning. The crowd was not on his side. Hargreave was hurt, but not dead. The ledger was in the mud, but Petra was covering it with her rifle. He had lost, unless there was no proof. He saw Mr. Sweeney, the county clerk, cowering by the door of the records office. "Sweeney!" Doolin screamed, his voice breaking. "Burn it, do you hear me? Burn the records office! Burn it all!" "Your Honor," Sweeney whimpered, his face white. "That is an order. Burn the evidence. Burn it now." Sweeney, a man who had only ever followed Doolin's orders, looked at the judge, looked at the guns, and made his choice. He ran inside the small, wooden building. A second later, he ran back out, his face a mask of terror. A bright, yellow-orange light bloomed in the office window. Sweeney, in his panic, had not just lit a fire. He had overturned the main kerosene lamp. The office, full of dry paper, old maps, and decades of deeds, exploded. "No!" May screamed, a sound of pure agony. It was not her ledger. It was the town's history. It was the original map. "The map," she cried to Hawk. "The army map. The proof for everyone." Hawk fired, forcing two men back. "May, stay down. It is just paper." "It is not," she yelled. "It is the law." She looked around, frantic. Peterson, the blacksmith, had a trough of water for his work. Thrown over its side was a heavy, sodden horse blanket. She did not think. She did not plan. She grabbed the wet blanket, threw it over her head, and ran. She ran from the safety of the stone wall, across the open street, and straight into the inferno of the records office. "May!" Hawk roared, his voice breaking. He stood up, ready to follow her. He never got the chance. Bram Kersey, who had been left, forgotten, in the mud, hit him from the side. Kersey was not a gunman. He was a brawler. Unarmed, he was still a bear. He wrapped his thick arms around Hawk, his face a mask of black rage and gray mud. "You will not have her," Kersey bellowed, his thumbs going for Hawk's eyes. They crashed to the ground, a desperate hand-to-hand fight in the doorway of the burning building. Hawk was lean, but Kersey had the weight. Smoke poured over them. Soot and ash rained down. Hawk could not get his rifle. He could not get his knife. He was fighting for his life, 2 feet from the woman he loved, who was burning for a piece of paper. "Help them!" It was Walt Hargreave. He was on his feet, his left arm useless, his face gray with pain. He was stumbling, not toward the fight, but toward the church. "The bell!" he yelled at Peterson. "Ring the bell! Get the ranchers! Get the law!" He fell, but he had planted the seed. Peterson, the blacksmith, looked at his forge, at the fight, at the burning office. He looked at the Tejana ranchers, Mr. Herrera and his sons, who were watching, their rifles in their hands, unsure which side to take. Peterson was a slow man, but his anger was pure. He grabbed his largest hammer, the one he used for shaping wagon wheels. "He is burning our deeds!" Peterson roared, his voice louder than the gunfire. He is burning our land. He is burning our town. Are we going to let him?" He did not wait for an answer. He ran into the street, his hammer raised. He was not a gunman. He was a citizen. Mr. Herrera saw it. He saw the widow, Petra, on the roof. He saw the blacksmith. He saw the Comanche fighting the man who had stolen their water. "Por Dios," he said. "He is one of us." He raised his rifle. "Hijos, we fight for our water." The Tejana ranchers opened fire, not at Hawk, but at the Pinkertons. The tide had turned. The power of the community, long dormant, had awakened. The street was a crossfire, but now it was the townsfolk, the ranchers, and the blacksmith, shoulder to shoulder, surrounding Doolin's hired guns. In the doorway, Kersey was choking the life from Hawk. His big hands were around Hawk's throat. Hawk's vision was turning black. "I told you," Kersey grunted. "She was mine." Kersey felt a sudden, terrible pain in his back. He grunted, confused. It was not a bullet. He looked down. Taze, the 7-year-old boy, was standing there, his face streaked with tears, stabbing Kersey's thigh with the small skinning knife Hawk had given May. It was just enough. The pain, the shock, made Kersey loosen his grip. Hawk got his breath. He used Kersey's own weight, rolling him, smashing his head against the door jamb. Kersey was stunned. He reached for a weapon, pulling a long boot knife. He slashed, wild. Hawk dodged. He saw the knife, the last desperate act of a beaten man. He did not meet the blade. He stepped inside it, grabbing Kersey's wrist, using the man's own momentum. He twisted. Kersey fell, his arm bent at an impossible angle. He screamed. Hawk did not kill him. He stood up, his chest heaving. He saw a long leather saddle rope, a lariat, hanging from a post. He grabbed it. He did not bother with knots. He just wrapped it, again and again, around the beaten foreman, until Kersey was a trussed, helpless bundle of rope and rage. A shape emerged from the inferno. It was May. She fell onto the street, her hair smoking, the wet blanket smoldering. She was coughing, her lungs on fire, but in her hand, clutched tight, her knuckles white, was a single, rolled, vellum-backed map. She had saved it. Judge Ephraim Doolin saw it all. His gunmen were throwing down their weapons, surrounded by angry ranchers. Kersey was tied. The fire was raging, but the one piece of paper that could undo him, the original survey, was safe in May's hand. He had to run. He saw his own horse, a fine black gelding, still tied to the hitching post. He ran. He did not look back. He fumbled with the reins, his hands shaking with panic. He got his foot in the stirrup. "Stop him!" Hargreave yelled from the church steps, where he was ringing the bell. Clang after clang after clang. Doolin threw himself into the saddle, but his foot, the one on the ground, was tangled. He had run for his horse, but he had not looked down. His foot was caught on one of his own fake survey stakes, one of the pine markers his men had pounded into the street to mark the new town line. The horse, spooked by the fire and the shouting, jumped. Doolin's foot was trapped. A sound, a sickening wet snap, was louder than the fire. Doolin screamed, a high, thin sound. He fell from the horse, his leg bent at a grotesque angle. He had not been shot. He had not been caught. He had been broken by his own cheap, fraudulent tools. The townspeople did not run to him. They walked. They surrounded him. Peterson, the blacksmith, his face black with soot, looked down at the whimpering judge. He did not hit him. He turned, grabbed a piece of shingle from the ruined office, and took a piece of charcoal from his own apron. He wrote 2 words, "Street Court." He hung the sign around Doolin's neck. The sound of the bell had carried, from the east, a cloud of new dust, a dozen riders, moving hard. They were not Pinkertons. They were not ranchers. They wore the badges. United States Marshals? "What in the name of God?" the lead marshal said, reining in, his eyes taking in the scene. A burning building, a man tied in the street, a man with a broken leg and a sign, a dozen armed citizens, and a Comanche, covered in mud, and a woman, covered in soot, standing back to back, holding the center. May finally let the map unroll a few inches. It was safe. She looked at Hawk. He was bleeding. He was breathing. He was alive. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. The fight was over. Hawk looked at the marshal. He looked at Doolin, who was weeping with pain and humiliation. He looked at Kersey, who was spitting curses. He did not ask for revenge. He walked to the marshal, May at his side. He handed him the pistol Kersey had used, and the boot knife. May held out the heavy brass county seal. "The law," Hawk said, his voice a dry rasp. "We give them to the law." The street of Drywater Crossing was a ruin of mud, paper, and broken men. The fire at the records office was a smoking, blackened husk, the fire itself doused by the townspeople. Judge Ephraim Doolin, his leg crudely splinted by the town doctor, was sitting on a bench, his face gray with pain and humiliation, his wrists in federal chains. Bram Kersey, washed clean of the alkali mud, was similarly bound, his face a mask of black bruises. The surviving Pinkertons, including Stockton, were in a separate, sullen line, their weapons gone. The lead United States Marshal, a tall, hard-faced man named Rourke, had taken command. The town's anger had been so thick, he could not have arrested Doolin and Kersey without a riot. Instead, he had deputized the entire street. "Seeing as your courthouse is a pile of ash," Rourke had said, his voice booming over the crowd, "and the man who ran it is in irons. This town is under federal jurisdiction until I say otherwise. The church is still standing. We will have this hearing now." The church was packed. Every bench was full. Peterson the blacksmith, Mr. Herrera and his sons, Petra the widow, and dozens of other ranchers and townsfolk who had, an hour before, been too afraid to speak, were now a silent, powerful jury. Marshal Rourke sat at the front, using the preacher's lectern as his desk. Doolin, Kersey, and the Pinkertons were guarded by 2 deputies. Hawk, May, Taze, and Little Bird were given the front pew. May had washed the soot from her face, and Hawk had rinsed the gray mud from his hair in a horse trough. He was wearing a borrowed shirt. "We will have the truth," Rourke said, his eyes scanning the room. "Mr. Hargreave, you seem to have started this. You will speak first." Walt Hargreave, his arm in a fresh white sling, his shoulder heavily bandaged, stood up. He looked tired, old, and, for the first time, honest. "My name is Walt Hargreave," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. "I am, or was, a detective for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. I was hired by Judge Doolin, through an anonymous payment, to find and suppress a witness to the Thistle Creek fire. That witness was May Calloway, now May Noya." A murmur went through the crowd. "I was not alone. My agency sent a cleanup team, led by Agent Stockton," he pointed. "Their orders were to silence her, one way or another." Stockton lunged. "You are a liar. Hargreave, you are a traitor." The marshal's deputy slammed Stockton back into his seat. Hargreave continued. "It was a lie. All of it. The woman was not a perjurer. She was the victim." He reached inside his coat with his good hand and produced the small, black ledger. "This is the proof. Bram Kersey's private accounts. It details the payments for the arson at Thistle Creek. It details the payments for the men who dug the illegal ditch. And it details a monthly payment from a holding company that matches the exact amount Judge Doolin has been skimming from the county railroad fund." He placed the book on the lectern. "It is a money laundering operation. Marshal, he burned out the ranchers, bought their land for pennies, and used Kersey to steal the water from the last free landowner, Hawk Noya, to sell to the railroad. It is all in the book." He sat down. "Mrs. Noya," Rourke said, his voice softer. May stood. She was trembling, but she held her head high. Taze watched her, his eyes wide. She did not bring her own ledger. She brought the single, soot-stained, vellum map. "The judge said he was protecting the county," May said, her voice clear and strong. "But he was burning our history. This is the 1853 United States Army Survey map. I saved it from the fire. It shows the spring on my husband's land. It is not called Dry Spring. It is called Noya's Spring. It has been a registered landmark for 26 years. Judge Doolin knew this. He just unpublished it." She unrolled the map. The names were clear. "He tried to take our land with this," she said, holding up Doolin's revocation notice. "And when we proved him wrong, he sent men to steal the water itself." She then held up the heavy brass county seal. "And when his men planted fake survey stakes, they dropped this. He was not just ignoring the law. He was forging it, and he tried to have me arrested or killed to cover it up." She looked at Doolin, who would not meet her eyes. "I am not a perjurer. I am a bookkeeper, and his numbers do not add up." She sat down. "Mr. Noya," Rourke said. Hawk stood. He was not a man of paper. He was not a man of words. He held up the broken shovel handle. The Kersey Cattle Company. Brand clearly visible. "He stole the water," Hawk said. He held up the carved paste stick from the canyon. "I tracked his men. This is the map of their ditch. They ambushed us. We fought. We won." He looked at the marshal. "I did not kill him," he said, nodding to Kersey. "I left him for you. The water is for all people. He tried to keep it for one man. This is not our way, and it is not your law." He sat down. Finally, Peterson the blacksmith stood, his face still smudged. "Marshal, I am not a man of maps, but I am a man of my word. I heard Judge Doolin. I heard him with my own ears. He screamed at Mr. Sweeney. He ordered him to burn the records office. He ordered him to burn my deed and Mr. Herrera's deed. He tried to burn our town to cover his tracks." "It is true, Mr. Herrera called out. "We are witnesses." Marshal Rourke looked at Doolin, who was weeping, not in remorse, but in rage. He looked at Kersey, who was spitting at the floor. "Ephraim Doolin," Rourke said, his voice a hammer. "You are stripped of your office. You are under arrest by the authority of the United States government for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and theft of federal property." He looked at Kersey. "Bram Kersey, you and your men are charged with attempted murder, sabotage, and conspiracy. You will all be taken to Fort Smith, and you will be tried, and you will hang." The church was silent, but it was the silence of a fever that had finally broken. After, Rourke stood at the edge of Hawk's land, looking at the spring. "This map is clear," he said to Hawk, "and your wife's testimony is clearer. The court recognizes your claim, by prior use, by historic name, and by homestead. Noya's spring is yours. Mr. Noya, no man can take it." He then looked at May. "Ma'am, it seems this county is without a records keeper, and that fire burned the schoolhouse, too, your school, at the camp. It is now the official school of Drywater Crossing. May's old life was cleared away." Rourke visited Silas Croft at the Gilded Nugget, and with the testimony of Mr. Herrera, found Croft guilty of running an illegal labor peonage system. Croft was fined every cent he had and given 24 hours to leave the territory. May's debt was not just erased. It was as if it had never been. A few days later, the smoke had cleared, the town was rebuilding, the air was clean. On the hill above the buffalo grass camp, Hawk built a fire. He did not use matches. He used a drill, a simple piece of wood and a base, turning it until a small, glowing coal was born in the dry tinder. Naomi, Taze, and Little Bird were there. They had returned from Aunt Chione's, and they had not returned alone. Chione herself was there, a strong, quiet woman with hawk's eyes. She and the other families from Red Knife had decided they were moving. They were leaving the Hungry Valley and joining the camp at Home Water. Hawk, May, and the children stood around the small, clean fire. Hawk spoke in his own language, his voice a low, rhythmic prayer. He called the names of his ancestors. He called the name of his mother, who had died in the cold. Then he looked at May. She was holding Little Bird, her face calm in the firelight. "May Noya," he said, his voice full. He switched to English, so she and the children would understand every word. "My grandmother told me that a man is only a man. He can run, he can fight, but he is a cold thing. It is the woman who is the fire. She is the center. She keeps the family from the dark. She keeps the heart warm." He reached into a small pouch, took a pinch of sweetgrass, and dropped it into the flames. It smelled sweet and clean. "You ran into a burning building for a piece of paper. You stood against gunmen with a book. You kept my family safe in the storm." He smiled, a true, warm smile. "You are the keeper of the fire. This is your true name." The work began. The camp was no longer a one-man outpost. It was a home. Peterson the blacksmith came, bringing lumber. Mr. Herrera's sons came, and they knew how to build with adobe. They were not just repairing the cabin. They were building a real kitchen, a place for Chione and May to cook for a dozen. They were building a long, new building. It was part bunkhouse, for the new families, and part school, for the children. The sound of hammers and laughter replaced the sound of gunfire. One afternoon, a lone rider approached. It was Walt Hargreave. His arm was in a clean sling, and he was sitting tall. The marshal, recognizing a man who had chosen the law over his paycheck, had let him go. His career was over, but his life was his own. He reined in his horse. Hawk was in the corral, not with Ghost, but with a new, wild filly, teaching her to trust his hand. May was on the porch of the new schoolhouse, a book in her hand. "A strange thing, Noya," Hargreave called out, his voice clear. "I have been shooting for a living for 20 years. He nodded toward Hawk's rifle, which was leaning, unused, against the cabin wall. Hargreave smiled, a tired, wise smile. "It takes a lot to learn, but when you have a family, you shoot less." Hawk stopped his work. He looked at May, who was watching him, a soft smile on her face. He looked at Taze, who was helping Peterson fit a window. He looked at the new, strong buildings. He reached up and touched the small, colored yarn braid, still tied to his wrist. He turned back to Hargreave. "No," Hawk said, his own voice clear and strong. "When I have a family, I keep the fire more." Hargreave nodded, as if that were the answer he had been waiting for. He tipped his hat to May. "Mrs. Noya, keeper." He turned his horse and rode east, into the rising sun. A free man. 1 year makes a difference. It turns a wound into a scar, a seed into a sapling, and a camp into a home. The wind still blew across the Texas Panhandle, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a promise. The Buffalo Grass Camp was no longer a single, lonely cabin. It had grown. The new building, the one that was part schoolhouse and part kitchen, was the center of life. Built of solid lumber from Peterson and thick, cool adobe bricks from the Herrera family. The corrals were larger, holding not just Hawk's wild horses, but the fine breeding stock he had begun to trade for. He was known, from Fort Elliott to the New Mexico line, as a man whose horses were true and whose word was iron. Hawk Noya was no longer just a horsebreaker. He was a teacher. In the mornings, he took the older children, Taze and Naomi, along with 2 of Mr. Herrera's sons, out into the breaks. He taught them not just to ride, but to read the land, to understand the horse, to move with the wind. May Noya was no longer just a bookkeeper. She was also a teacher. In the afternoons, the schoolhouse filled. She taught Little Bird, now 5 and bright as a new penny, her letters. She taught Taze his numbers, his mind a steel trap for figures. She taught Naomi, who now read better than many of the men in town, how to write a contract, how to read a deed. Cheyenne, Hawk's aunt, was the heart. She ran the kitchen, her quiet, steady presence a balm for all of them. The other families from Red Knife had settled, building their own small homes, tending their own gardens, their children adding to the life of the school. Hawk and May were partners. The word had a new meaning. It was not just a legal term. It was a truth they lived every day. They were a husband and a wife. They were a team, a single, fluid motion. He was the land, she was the paper. He was the strength, she was the law. And in their union, they had become something new. The winter had been hard, but they had been prepared. The spring thaw came early, a rush of clean, cold water that turned the prairie a startling, deep green. The first spring rain was soft, a gentle washing of the air. That morning, the whole community gathered by the spring. It was Hawk's idea, a ceremony. He stood by the water, which was clear and full. "This place," he said, his voice quiet but carrying, was called Dry Spring. It was a name of fear, a name that meant a man could steal the water and leave the land to die. He looked at May. She was standing beside him, her hand in his. "It is not a dry spring," he continued. "It is a full one. It is the heart of this house." He reached into a pouch and took out a handful of sacred corn pollen, letting it drift onto the surface of the bubbling water. "It is not a name of fear. It is a name of family. From today, it is home water." The new name settled over them. Home water. It was right. Later that day, Hawk stood on a ladder inside the new schoolhouse. He was using his knife, the one he had held to Kersey's throat, but he was not fighting. He was carving. On the huge central pine beam that held up the roof, he was carving a symbol. It was not a Comanche pictograph. It was not a white man's brand. It was his own. A hawk, its wings spread, sheltering a small, steady flame, the mark of his new family, the Fire family. May watched him. When he was done, she went inside their own cabin. The small, original cabin was theirs, a private space they had kept. Hawk no longer slept in the shed. He had not, since the night of the siege. She was holding a wooden frame, one Peterson had made for her. Inside it, under a piece of precious glass, was a photograph. 6 months ago, a traveling photographer had passed through Drywater Crossing, his wagon a portable studio. May had traded 2 of her best blankets for his time. She hung it on the wall. It was the first picture she had ever owned. It was all of them. Hawk, standing tall, his hand on her shoulder, his face not hard, but proud. May, seated, a book in her lap, a small, sure smile on her face. Cheyenne beside her, her hands folded. And the children, Naomi, Taze, and Little Bird, arranged at their feet, scrubbed clean and looking at the camera with a fierce, bright intensity. A family, captured in silver and glass. The town of Drywater Crossing had changed. 2. The railroad had arrived. The steel line now running a mile south of town. But it was not the disaster Doolin had promised. It was just a railroad. The town, without its corrupt judge, had been forced to remake itself. Marshal Rourke had appointed Peterson the acting magistrate, and his first act was to call a town meeting. "We need rules," he had said, his hammer in his hand. "But they must be our rules, fair rules." And so, they had turned to May. She had spent a month writing. She talked to Mr. Herrera about the Tejano traditions of shared water. She talked to Hawk and Cheyenne about the Comanche way, of land that was used but not owned. She talked to Peterson about the white man's law of deed and claim. The result was the Drywater Covenant. It was not a law. It was a community contract. It set the rules for grazing. It guaranteed access to water for all, with a shared responsibility to keep the ditches clean. It set aside land for the town, and land for the bands, and land for the ranches. It was a revolutionary, simple, common-sense document. It was signed, at a public table, by Peterson the blacksmith, by Mr. Herrera, and by Hawk Noya. The seal that bound it was not Doolin's stolen brass, but a simple wax stamp, a circle, representing the community, with an open hand in the center. The night was quiet. The wind was a gentle whisper. Inside the cabin, the fire was lit. It was not a raging, angry thing. It was a steady, warm heart. Little Bird was asleep, her small body curled up on a cot, her face peaceful. Taze was on the floor, his head bent over a piece of slate, his brow furrowed as he did a sum. Naomi, now 11, sat at the table, reading a book May had ordered from back east. She was reading not just with her eyes, but with her fingers, tracing the words, savoring them. May was in a rocking chair, a new one, mending a tear in Taze's shirt. Shayoni sat across from her, her own hands busy with a basket. Hawk sat on the threshold of the open door, his back to the cabin, facing the night. He was not on guard. He was just watching. He put the bone flute to his lips. He began to play. The sound was high and clean, the old, lonely song of his people. But it was not lonely anymore. It was a lullaby. It was a song of peace. It wove through the quiet sounds of the room, the scratch of charcoal on slate, the turn of a page, the whisper of a needle through cloth, the crackle of the fire. It was the sound of a home. Taze finally put down his slate. Done. He crawled onto his cot and was asleep in a minute. Naomi carefully marked her page, closed her book, and went to her own bed. May put down her mending. She walked over to Hawk, who had stopped playing. She sat on the threshold beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. They looked out at the prairie, bathed in the light of a full, white moon. The new buildings of their home were dark, solid shapes in the night. The railroad will bring more people, May said softly. It will get loud. We are not loud, Hawk said. We are strong. This house is strong. The law, your covenant, is strong. We will stand. They will learn from us. He looked at her, his profile clear and sharp in the moonlight. A young Comanche boy once bought a bride to do his work, he said, the words a low murmur. But she gave him the family he missed. She gave him a life to live. He turned to her, his eyes dark and full of a deep, quiet love. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, his hand finding hers in the darkness. May, he whispered, the contract has expired. She felt a small, happy tear trace a path down her cheek. The house, he finished, his voice rough, has not. Thank you all for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below. Let us share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to Wild West Tales, giving this video a like, and hitting that support button to help this story reach even more listeners.